There are 12 toxic things we do in conversations without realising it that, if we continue doing them, will only result in one thing: creating more distance between us and the people we want to connect with. So let's cover these 12 things so we can stop doing them. Number 1 in the category of judging is criticising. This is where we engage in a negative evaluation of someone's attitude, person, so who they are deep down, or their actions. It might sound something like this: you brought it upon yourself. You've got no one else to blame. Allow me to highlight one key feature of human nature that, if you understand, will skyrocket your social skills. And that is the unfortunate reality that most people, in fact, all people, hate themselves in one way or another. So, if you're the unsociable fellow who criticises other people about the things they already feel self-critical about, they won't want to keep you round for much long. Don't go on a constant fault-finding safari with the people you're talking to. Instead, search others for their virtues, and they'll love you. Number 2, name-calling. Yep, I know, you might already think, Lewis, of course that's toxic, but let me explain. When we name call or throw a label onto someone else, what we're doing is we're creating a stigma of the other person. Let me highlight another feature of human nature as well. People are processes, not products, famously said by the psychologist Carl Rogers. Which is to say, when we name call other people or label them, we're creating a product out of them by believing they are set in stone and they won't be able to break free from the label we have put onto them. We might call someone smart, an idiot, or intelligent. It doesn't matter what label you give someone. When you do give someone a label, you create a type and you remove the person in front of you, because you need to understand that life and human beings is an ever-flowing, changing process. And the second we put a label on someone or we name call them, we are cementing them into that label. And then one day, if they want to break free from the label that we have foisted upon them, they're likely not going to feel permitted to change who they are, because we always see them a certain way. As Krishnamurti says, other people are mirrors, but the view is always distorted. When we label other people, we block their psychological growth, because all of their change and psychological flourishing and breaking free from their past that they naturally gravitate towards is being blocked by the label that you're giving them. Instead, when you remove this label, they're able to grow freer into whoever they're going to become. And this is the thing. You might not like who people become, at which point, that's your problem. But so long as you permit people the ability to grow into whatever their destiny dictates them to grow into, again, you're facilitating their growth. So don't label people, because when you do so, you fix them into an identity that they might not have agreed to. Number 3, diagnosing, otherwise known as psychoanalyzing. This is where you analyze why someone is behaving a certain way. Guilty. And if you have any interest in psychology, I guarantee you've done this to people as well. In a conversation, we might say things like this: I can read you like a book. Just because you went to college, you think you're better than me. When we diagnose people, or try to do so, we adopt the role of a therapist. Now, it's often good to adopt the role of a therapist in terms of your listening skills, so you can sit back and really attentively listen to someone. But when we try to diagnose, we adopt the role of the annoying therapist who thinks that they know everything about us, when really they don't. Sometimes you might find yourself in situations where you want to decode the hidden motives of a certain person, but more often than not, when we adopt the role of the annoying diagnosing therapist and we try to detect the hidden motives underlying what someone is saying, it's incredibly unnecessary, and it's actually avoidance of listening. So don't diagnose people. Telling you from experience, I've done it in some relationships in the past and it stifled them, otherwise known as I cocked everything up. But anyway, moving on to the next part. Lastly, in the category of judging is number 4, praising evaluatively. I wasn't going to put this in because I knew that some of you would jump straight down to the comments and be like, oh Lewis, it's great to praise people. So let me explain. When we praise someone evaluatively, we're making a positive judgment of the other person. Again, you might be thinking, Lewis, what's wrong with that? Well, listen to this statement. You're such a good girl. I know you'll help me with the housework later. Did you detect the subtle, or I would put it outright manipulation in this sentence? When you praise evaluatively in this example, such as a mum saying it to her daughter, she's led with a praise in order to manipulate her daughter into doing something that she wants. Most of the time, people praise you because they want to get something from you. Now, I don't want to spark you into a social paranoia where you never are able to take compliments from other people, but because we're talking about ourselves here, just pay attention to when you do this to other people, when you lead with a praise because you want something from them. But yes, praise isn't all bad and not all praise is manipulative. Well, it kind of is, regardless of whether you want someone to do something positive more or not. But anyway, the best way to praise people is by doing it with no expectations of anything in return. And you use this framework. When you describe their action, I feel, state your emotion, because then state the effect it has on your life. For example, you might say to your partner, when you greet me after I come home from work, I feel loved, because it shows you value the time we spend together. If you praise someone and expect something in return, that's a transaction. That's not a praise. Moving into the realm of sending solutions to other people, we're now going to tackle two at the same time because the result of what they promote is very similar. Number 5, we have ordering, and number 6, we have threatening. When you order someone, you assume they don't know any better, so you try to dictate what they do. This might sound something like this. Do your homework. Why? Because I said so. In any conversation where you say, because I said so, without providing a reasonable explanation, is ordering the other person. Threatening is when you highlight the negative consequences that will follow if this person doesn't do what you want them to do. You'll do it or else. We see this in toxic relationships all of the time, where they do one thing. They hold the relationship hostage. Maybe you've done this, or maybe you've experienced this in the past. You get into an argument with your partner and one of you says, well, if you keep doing this, then I'll break up with you. Or maybe we just shouldn't be together. Threatening with potential negative consequences that might come. Now, what these two things do is they promote a psychological term called reactance, which is the process where someone tries to force you to do something, and because they're forcing you to do it and not respecting your autonomy, you actively dig your heels in and do the complete opposite of what they want you to do. So it's either that happens due to ordering or threatening, or you promote over-submissiveness in the other person, which, if you want a friend or a partner who challenges you, then if they bow to every word you say, you're just a tyrant. So, to combat these two things, suggest things to other people. Don't force it down their throat. And respect people's autonomy, their ability to make use of the information available and to make their own decision, albeit they might be influenced by what you suggest, but suggest, not force. Number 7 is moralising, and this is when we use the most toxic word in the English language. Should. Moralising statements manifest along the lines of this. You should break up with her. It's the right thing to do. You don't visit me enough. And all of these statements do one thing. They thwart the self-expression of other people. And our self-expression, if we're on the receiving end of them, thwart was a much too complex word. Don't know why that came to mind, so let's just use the word diminish. They diminish the self-expression of other people. Do you know what they also do when we say these? Is it creates a halo effect, where the person saying all of this nonsense paints themselves out to be this holier than thou person who suddenly has the wisdom of Athena on our lives. Dude, who hurt you? I could summarise all of this with one sentence. Don't mess with other people's destiny. You have no idea where they're heading, you have no idea what's in store for them, so do not moralise their behaviour by taking a top-down approach to their life. Let them express themselves in whatever way they see fit. Oh, that wasn't the last one. There's 2 more in this category. Number 8, excessive or inappropriate questioning. I wasn't going to include this in this list, but I thought screw it, I'll add it in anyway, because it's an important thing to mention. You know those moments when you're having a conversation with someone and you're offloading the inner workings of your psychology and you're sharing the depths of your soul to this person, but then they suddenly ask you a question that is either completely irrelevant or just a nonsensical question. Now, We covered a video the other day about the importance of asking people follow-up questions, and I still stand by that video. It's very important. But you can excessively and inappropriately ask people questions by asking them questions that are completely irrelevant to what they're saying. And worse yet, in the experience of someone in the flow of speaking, and maybe they're sharing something quite vulnerable with you, asking them a question just stifles what they're saying. So it's best to reflect what they're saying back to them. I've mentioned it many times from the GOAT Chris Voss. After they've finished talking and you've listened completely, you might reflect what they said back to them with something like this. It sounds like that was quite a tough experience for you. Or it seems like that was a lot off your chest. Just giving them the feeling that you're there with them, you're listening to them, and you're not asking them a question which is inappropriate to what they're saying. Okay, this is the last one in this sequence. Number 9, advising. Over the past few years, one of my favourite movie quotes has been Al Pacino's in The Devil's Advocate, where he said, "The worst vice is advice." And recently, I've been reading back through Robert Bolton's masterpiece People Skills, and he has some solid wisdom as to why advice sucks. In the book People Skills, Robert Bolton says, advice is often a basic insult to the intelligence of the other person. It implies a lack of confidence in the capacity of the person with the problem to understand and cope with his or her difficulties. As Norman Kagan puts it, in essence, we implicitly say to someone, "You've been making a big deal out of a problem whose solution is immediately apparent to me. How stupid you are." Imagine your friend comes to you and says something along the lines of this: "Oh, work has been so hard recently and life just feels so heavy at the moment, and worse yet, Maria, my girlfriend, she hasn't been present at home this week, so we've hardly seen each other. Oh, I just don't know how to cope." And you say, "That's an easy problem. Just do this," and outline a solution that he couldn't care less about. When we give other people advice, we do so because it makes us feel better about ourselves. But, as Robert Bolton highlights, when we advise someone else, we overlook all of the complexities underlying this person's issue, all of the guilt, shame, issues, past experiences, emotions, and complexities that make this situation much more complicated than our advice allows us to realise. So bite your tongue. Just listen. Allow the other person to vent while you hold space for them, and appreciate that sometimes things are just a little bit complicated and not everyone wants a solution. As the Danish economist Dag Hammarskjöld said, not knowing the question, it was easy for him to give an answer. Last little thing I want to explain about advice is when I was 18 I was travelling alone around Europe, and I met a Buddhist Sri Lankan man on a train to Paris one day. And he taught me something about advice I will never forget. He said, "Lewis, when you give someone advice, you wag your finger at them. But what you don't realise is there are 3 fingers pointed back towards you. So for each bit of responsibility you throw onto the other person through the advice that you give them, you adopt 3 times as much responsibility for their issue. Be careful." Train wisdom. Let's cover the final 3 points of toxicity. Number 10 is diverting. This is where we push what the other person is saying aside, and it manifests in the sentences of, "You think you've got it bad, wait until you hear this," or "Speaking of," and then talking about what you want to talk about. One of my friends has this nickname for people who do this. He calls it 2 sheds. So if you mention to someone, "Oh, I've got a shed," they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I've got 2. There are only 3 reasons why people divert. Number 1, people divert because they're unskilled at listening. They're not paying attention to what you're saying, so they don't pick up on the fact you actually want to talk about this thing, so they change the subject. Number 2, they just want the attention of the conversation on themselves, which we all do sometimes, but some people more than others. And lastly, number 3, they feel uncomfortable with the emotions being presented, which we're going to cover in 2 points' time. So to be practical here before we move on, if you do share a similar experience to what this person is talking about, share the experience briefly, but then allow them to reopen the dialogue of what they was talking about so that they can feel better connected to you because they now know there are similarities between you, but that you've given them the opportunity to press play on what they were saying. Two more. Number 11 is logical argument. And this is where we try to appeal to logic or facts in the face of what someone is saying. In a sentence, this would look like, look at the facts. If you wouldn't have bought the car, we could have put a down payment on a house already. There's one thing to note, which is mainly that sometimes logical arguments are necessary in a conversation, but when someone is leading what they're saying with emotion, then the emotion must become the focus. Logical arguments defaulting to this is very similar to advising, and it's a great way to avoid talking about emotions in a conversation. But remember, feelings are the focus if someone has come to you with an issue they just want to vent about. Lastly, number 12, and this is my favourite one. Hence I've left it till last. Reassuring. Again, you might be thinking, Lewis, why can't we reassure people? It's because without us knowing it, we are emotionally withdrawing from the situation when we try to reassure people. When we reassure people, what we do is we say things like, don't worry, it will all be okay. Everything works out in the end. Or, this too shall pass. But you know what we're communicating when we say things like this? Stop feeling what you're feeling. I'm guilty of this because I did this to a friend like 2 weeks ago who was going for a breakup, and I remember we had a really long phone call. It was about an hour and a half long, and we was covering some really good psychological ground of getting him into a place where he was going through with the breakup, but he was tearing himself apart with it. And I just said to him, mate, don't worry, in 2 weeks time we'll look back on all of this with laughter. Bad move, because that's what I said to him. Again, in the words of the communication expert Robert Bolton, reassurance is a way of seeming to comfort another person while actually doing the opposite. The word comfort comes from the Latin words con and fortis, which means strengthened by being with. Reassurance does not allow the comforter to really be with the other. It can be a form of emotional withdrawal. Reassurance is often used by people who like the idea of being helpful, but who don't want to experience the emotional demand that goes with it. So when someone comes to you with a problem, don't reassure them. Just hold the space for them and label their emotions back to them. For example, as we highlighted earlier, a friend might come to you and say something along the lines of this: it's been so hard this week, no matter what I do, there's always a million things left to do. What's more, my ex texted me, which brought all the feelings back. Oh man, this week's been a complete disaster. It sounds like you're feeling a bit defeated. I'm here to listen if you want to talk more. I won't give advice. I'll just listen. Then, if you're in the right frame of mind, listen to them vent without pouring flames on their fire. And lastly, one final reason why reassurance doesn't work is because people's self-images aren't changed through external pressure. Remember, in order for someone to change their behaviour, they have to choose to do so. So, they were the dirty dozen of communication. One thing I wanted to finalise with is we're all going to do these at some point, but the less we do them, the more we stand a chance at building a bridge between us and the person we're trying to connect with. Thank you for your time and attention, and thank you for helping the channel hit 100,000 subscribers. My name's been Lewis. My name will always be Lewis. Don't know why I said that. But stay disciplined, playful, and dangerous. Adios, muchachos y muchachas.